I never imagined a stuck zipper could lead to something so dangerous. "Ryan, can you help me?" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing against my bare back, sending a shiver through me. The zipper resisted, but it wasn't the only tension in the room. His breath lingered near my neck, and suddenly I felt it, the moment everything between us shifted. Emma had always been the dependable wife, the caring stepmother, the woman who put everyone else first. At 39, her life seemed stable, at least from the outside. She lived in a beautiful home with her husband, David, and his 22-year-old son, Ryan, who had recently come home from college for the summer. But beneath the surface, Emma felt hollow. David had grown distant over the years, consumed by work and late-night meetings that left her alone far too often. Their marriage felt more like a partnership than a romance, and Emma couldn't remember the last time he looked at her the way he used to. She tried to ignore the ache inside her, filling her days with chores and projects to distract from the emptiness. That's how she found herself sorting through her closet one afternoon, pulling out a black dress she hadn't worn in years. It was elegant, fitted, and carried memories of a time when she felt vibrant and desired. Looking in the mirror, she longed to feel that way again, to be seen, to be wanted. She slipped into the dress, letting the smooth fabric hug her curves, but when she reached back to zip it up, the zipper wouldn't budge. Frustration turned into hesitation as she thought about asking Ryan for help. He had always been kind, respectful, and easy to talk to. But lately, Emma couldn't ignore how much he had changed. Ryan wasn't the boy she'd helped raise anymore. He was a man now. Tall, confident, with a sharp jawline and a gaze that lingered longer than it should. She tried to dismiss the thought, but the way his presence filled the room made her feel something unfamiliar, something dangerous. Shaking off the unease, she called out to him, telling herself it was just a zipper, just a favor. But as he entered the room, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in the dress. And when his fingers brushed against her skin, Emma's heart raced in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was harmless, she told herself. But deep down, she already knew, something had shifted, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were different, charged in ways Emma couldn't explain. She told herself it was nothing, that Ryan had only helped with the zipper, but her mind wouldn't let the moment go. She caught herself replaying it, the heat of his breath near her neck, the way his fingers lingered longer than necessary. It was innocent, wasn't it? Just a favor. But then why did her pulse quicken every time she heard his footsteps in the hallway? Ryan, however, seemed unaffected. He moved through the house casually, flashing her his usual smiles and chatting about his college life. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze lingered a second too long when their eyes met, or that his compliments carried an undertone she hadn't noticed before. One afternoon, Emma sat in the living room folding laundry when Ryan walked in. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her. "You've been quiet lately," he said. Emma looked up, startled by the observation. "Just keeping busy," she replied, forcing a smile. He stepped closer, sitting down on the couch across from her. "You don't have to do all this, you know." "What do you mean?" He shrugged, his eyes steady. "I mean, you do so much for everyone. It's okay to let someone take care of you for once." Her breath hitched, and she dropped the shirt she was folding. The words were harmless on the surface, but the way he said them felt heavier, almost loaded. She quickly stood up, brushing her hands against her jeans as if to shake off the moment. "I'm fine, really. Just distracted." But later that night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't deny how those words lingered, how they made her feel seen in a way David hadn't made her feel in years. The tension only grew. One evening, Emma walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water and found Ryan standing there, shirtless, fixing himself a late-night snack. "Oh, I didn't know you were up," she stammered, averting her eyes. "Couldn't sleep," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "You?" "Same." He reached for a glass and handed it to her, his fingers brushing against hers. Emma froze, the simple touch sending an unexpected shiver through her. She pulled her hand away quickly, almost too quickly, spilling a drop of water on the counter. "Sorry," she muttered. Ryan smiled, but there was something different in his expression, something knowing. "It's okay," he said, his voice softer now. Emma fled the kitchen moments later, her heart racing. She told herself she was imagining things, that the tension was in her head. But the truth settled in her stomach like a stone. She wasn't imagining it. She had seen it in his eyes. And worse, she had felt it too. The tension between Emma and Ryan had become impossible to ignore. It lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken, turning ordinary moments into something dangerous. Emma told herself to keep her distance, to avoid situations that might blur the lines any further. But the more she tried, the more she found herself drawn to him. One evening, she was in the living room reading a book when Ryan walked in. He wore sweatpants and a fitted t-shirt, his hair slightly damp from the shower. He flopped onto the couch across from her, stretching out and flashing a playful smile. "Quiet night?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. Emma closed the book, forcing a casual tone. "Yeah, just trying to unwind." Ryan's eyes flicked to the glass of wine on the table beside her. "Mind if I join you?" She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Of course not." He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a beer, settling into the couch closer this time. Too close. The space between them felt smaller, more intimate than before. They talked about nothing and everything. College, future plans, childhood memories. But underneath it all was an undercurrent Emma couldn't deny. At one point, Ryan leaned closer, his knee brushing against hers. The touch lingered and Emma's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "You're really easy to talk to, you know that?" he said, his voice lower now, softer. Emma laughed nervously, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You're just being nice." "No, I mean it," Ryan said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I feel like I can be myself around you. I don't have to pretend." Emma's stomach flipped. She looked away, pretending to adjust her bracelet, but she felt the heat rising in her cheeks. "You're sweet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A silence followed, heavy, expectant. Ryan leaned back, his gaze still fixed on her. "Can I tell you something?" Emma looked up, her heart racing. "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "You deserve better, Emma. You deserve to be happy." Her breath caught, and before she could stop herself, the words tumbled out. "I haven't felt happy in a long time." Ryan's eyes softened. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers on the couch. Emma's pulse raced as she felt the warmth of his touch. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them thickened, charged with something Emma didn't dare name. And then it happened. Ryan leaned in slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, giving her every chance to stop him. But she didn't. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then deeper, more urgent. Emma's heart pounded as she gave in to the kiss, her body melting into his. The sound of footsteps outside snapped her back to reality. She pulled away abruptly, her breathing ragged. "This is wrong," she whispered, standing up and putting distance between them. Ryan stood too, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said softly. "But that doesn't change how I feel." Emma turned away, her thoughts spinning. She knew she should put an end to this, draw a line before it went any further. But as she stood there, her body still humming from his touch, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur. Emma avoided Ryan as much as she could, retreating to her room or busying herself with chores whenever he was around. But no matter how much distance she tried to put between them, the memory of his lips on hers lingered. It haunted her, the way her body had betrayed her, the way her heart raced every time she thought about him. She knew it was wrong, but the thought of stopping felt impossible. One evening, Emma found herself alone in the house again. David had left for another business trip, leaving her with too much time to think. She poured herself a glass of wine, hoping it would calm the storm inside her. She had barely taken a sip when she heard footsteps behind her. "Couldn't sleep again?" Ryan's voice cut through the silence. Emma froze, her pulse quickening. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his hair slightly messy, his t-shirt clinging to his chest. "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "Just needed something to unwind." Ryan stepped closer. "Me too." There was something different in his eyes tonight, something more determined. Emma felt it immediately, and her breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "Why not?" Ryan asked, his gaze locking onto hers. "Because it's wrong," she whispered. Ryan stepped even closer, his voice soft but firm. "Is it? Because it doesn't feel wrong to me. Not when I'm with you." Emma's heart pounded as he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her body betrayed her again, leaning into his touch instead of pulling away. "Ryan," she started, but before she could finish, his lips were on hers again, this time hungrier, more desperate. She melted into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms wrapped around her. It felt like everything she had been holding back had finally broken free. But then a noise. The front door opened, followed by the unmistakable sound of David's voice calling out, "Emma? I'm home early." Panic shot through her. She pushed Ryan away, her breathing ragged. "You have to go," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Fear? Regret? He slipped out of the room just as David walked in. There you are, David said, smiling as he set his briefcase down. I thought I'd surprise you. Emma forced a smile, her heart still racing. I didn't expect you. He kissed her cheek, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. You okay? You look flushed. I'm fine, she lied, stepping back. But as David poured himself a drink and started talking about work, Emma couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting upstairs, to Ryan, to the kiss, to the fire she knew she couldn't extinguish. Later that night, as Emma lay in bed next to David, she couldn't sleep. The guilt gnawed at her, but so did the longing. She hated herself for it, but she also craved more. The next morning, Emma avoided Ryan again, but this time, he didn't let her. He cornered her in the hallway, his voice low. We need to talk. No, we don't, Emma said, trying to push past him. But Ryan grabbed her hand, stopping her. You can't just pretend this didn't happen. You can't tell me you don't feel it too. Her resolve cracked. Of course I feel it, she hissed. But it doesn't matter. It can't happen again. Ryan stepped closer, his voice softer now. What if it already has? What if it's too late? Tears welled in Emma's eyes. She hated how much she wanted him, hated how weak she felt. But before she could answer, the sound of David's voice calling from downstairs interrupted them. Emma pulled away, leaving Ryan standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. But as she walked down the stairs, she knew this wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before the truth came out, and she had no idea what would happen when it did. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Emma felt like she was walking on glass, terrified that one wrong move would shatter everything. Ryan had kept his distance since their last confrontation, but she could feel his presence everywhere. His footsteps echoing in the hall, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the living room. And then there was David. Oblivious. Clueless. He carried on as if their marriage was fine, as if nothing had changed. But Emma knew better. Everything had changed. One evening, while David was working late, Emma sat on the couch staring blankly at the television. She barely registered the noise of the show playing. Her mind was somewhere else. On Ryan, on the kiss, on the way his touch had awakened something inside her she thought had died years ago. The knock on the door jolted her out of her thoughts. She opened it to find Ryan standing there, his eyes filled with something that made her stomach flip. We can't do this, she said, stepping back. Ryan ignored her words and walked inside, closing the door behind him. Emma, we need to talk, he said, his voice steady. There's nothing to talk about, she whispered, crossing her arms as if to shield herself. Stop pretending, Ryan snapped, stepping closer. Stop acting like this didn't mean anything. Emma's breath hitched. Of course it meant something. That's the problem. He reached out, grabbing her hand. Then don't fight it. You're not happy, Emma. I see it every day. He doesn't see you, but I do. Tears filled her eyes. It doesn't matter. What we did, it was a mistake. Ryan's jaw tightened. A mistake? Is that what you really think? She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Before she could speak, the front door opened. David. His eyes darted between them, and the look on his face shifted, from confusion to suspicion. What's going on here? He asked, his voice sharp. Emma quickly pulled her hand away from Ryan's, but it was too late. The damage was done. Nothing, she said, forcing a laugh. Ryan was just helping me with. David cut her off. Helping you with what? The room fell silent. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as David's eyes locked onto hers. Emma, he asked again, his voice quieter now. But before she could answer, Ryan stepped in. I was just leaving, he said quickly, brushing past David and heading out the door. David turned back to Emma, his face pale. What the hell is going on? She wanted to lie. She wanted to say it was nothing. But the weight of the truth was too heavy to ignore. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what's happening anymore. David stepped back, his face contorted with anger. Are you kidding me? With him? My son. Tears streamed down Emma's face. It's not what you think. Don't, David snapped, cutting her off. Don't lie to me. Emma felt like the walls were closing in. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating weight of guilt and shame. But there was nowhere to go. David grabbed his keys off the counter. I can't even look at you right now. And just like that, he was gone. Emma collapsed onto the couch, her entire body trembling. She wanted to scream, to cry, to undo everything, but it was too late. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The house felt emptier than ever, and as the minutes stretched into hours, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what came next. Ryan. David. Her marriage. Everything was broken now, and there was no way to fix it. The days after David left felt like a blur. Emma wandered through the house like a ghost, haunted by the echoes of everything she had destroyed. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the hum of the refrigerator. Reminders that life was moving forward even as hers felt frozen. Ryan had packed his bags and left the next morning without saying goodbye. Emma didn't blame him. She couldn't even look at herself in the mirror, let alone face him. She spent her nights replaying the moments that led her here. The loneliness, the temptation, the heat of Ryan's touch, and the devastating fallout. She had let herself believe that one stolen moment of passion could fill the void in her heart, but all it had done was rip her life apart. David didn't come home. He didn't answer her calls or respond to her messages. The silence from him hurt the most. She had betrayed his trust in the worst way possible, and now she had to face the consequences. One afternoon, as Emma sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair where David used to sit, her phone buzzed. It was a text from him. "We need to talk." Her hands trembled as she typed back, "I'll be here." When David arrived later that evening, Emma could barely meet his eyes. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of what had happened had aged him overnight. He sat down across from her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Why?" Emma felt the tears building again, but forced herself to stay composed. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely. I felt invisible. And I made a terrible mistake." David's jaw clenched. "A mistake? With my son?" She flinched but nodded. "I can't take it back, but I'm sorry. I hate myself for what I've done. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but—" "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emma," he said, cutting her off. "And I don't know if I want to." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, but she didn't blame him. "I understand," she said softly. David stood, and for a moment, Emma thought he was leaving for good. But instead, he paused at the door. "I'll call you," he said. "But I need time." And then he was gone again. Emma sat there for hours, letting the weight of his words settle in. She had broken something that might never be repaired, and now all she could do was face the aftermath. She thought about Ryan, the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel alive again. But it wasn't real. It was an illusion, a desperate attempt to fill the emptiness inside her. As the days turned into weeks, Emma began to rebuild her life alone. She threw herself into work, therapy, and long walks that gave her time to think. She started journaling, trying to understand what had driven her to such reckless choices. And slowly, she began to find herself again, not as a wife or a stepmother, but as a woman learning to stand on her own. The guilt never completely went away, but it taught her something valuable. Moments of weakness can destroy everything you've built. And no fleeting desire is worth the pain of losing the people who matter most. Emma knew she might never get David back, but she also knew she couldn't let this mistake define her. And as she closed her journal that night, she promised herself one thing. She would never let loneliness lead her down that path again. If you were in Emma's shoes, what would you have done? Could you resist temptation, or would loneliness push you toward danger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. Trust me, you won't believe the next story I have lined up. Stay tuned.